Hey everyone, this is Martin Willis, your host. Welcome to the Everything Else Show. Now, just a couple of announcements. We have a great guest this evening. His name is Denver Michaels, and he is going to be talking mostly about lake monsters. He's written a number of books. We're going to be talking about that. I think he's got 3 books that he's written in the last couple of years. So we're going to be talking about his books. But I wanted to also say that these shows I do are for the different types of topics that I find interesting. It's not always easy to get guests, and it's really difficult for me to do 2 shows a week. I do the UFO show every Wednesday, and this show on Mondays. It's difficult. I'm going to do them when it's convenient and works out, and there's topics that I want to listen to. I know that sounds like a real loose commitment, but I have a number of shows racked up now, about 3 or 4 of them that are coming up. So I will be running shows, but not every Monday night. That's how I'm going to put it. My work has gotten very, very intense right now. So I will do what I can, and we'll see you here on Monday nights when I can be here. Tonight, we are going to be talking again about lake monsters. Denver Michaels has written a couple of books, one of them being Water Monsters South of the Border. Another one is People Are Seeing Something, a survey of lake monsters in the United States and Canada. And his recent book, Wild and Wonderful and Paranormal, West Virginia. Denver, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your patience, because I know when I left to Russia and things were changed around a lot, I think we arranged your schedule like 5 times.
Yeah, that's okay.
So
I'm pretty easygoing. I can usually, I can usually accommodate you. It's usually not a problem.
So, hey, what got you interested in the first place in writing about these topics?
Well, it's one of those things. Ever since I was a kid, I've been interested in, paranormal topics, just fringe type topics, that sort of thing, and lake monsters specifically. I really got introduced to that through an Unsolved Mysteries episode, kind of dating myself. That was my favorite show back in high school, and I remember they did an episode on the Ogopogo, and I can remember to this day, Robert Stack had a graphic up with all these little dots on it of all these lake monster locations around the world, and I'd really, kind of. Yeah, you knew about the Loch Ness monster, but I didn't know it was so widespread, and so I just kind of got into it, and just over the years, just read up as much as I could and things like that, and a couple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, after I turned 40, I kind of, I'd always wanted to write a book, and just kind of like, why don't I write a book on lake monsters? Just kind of took off from there.
Wow, great. Yeah, I really liked Unsolved Mysteries as well. They did a really good job. I've talked to a number of people on different incidences. In other words, Rendlesham Forest and things like that, and they said that they did an excellent job. No overdoing, no exaggerating, or very little of it, and that seldom happens in a show like that. Usually, they really add a lot to it. So, yeah. So, I've always found this interesting. The Loch Ness Monster had me intrigued since I was really young. But there's some controversy about the famous picture. Some people saying that it is a hoax. Some people are saying it's not a hoax. What are your thoughts about that in particular?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, I mean, it seems like that picture. I think they kind of call it the surgeon's photo, the iconic picture, like the neck sticking out of the water. From everything that I've been able to kind of read on it and everything, it seems like I kind of lean toward more it being a hoax. But with that being said, I don't think the Loch Ness Monster itself is, necessarily a hoax. I think that, just because a few pictures or what have you are faked, that, to me, that doesn't, take away from the plausibility of the creature
Yeah.
itself.
And, you know, right off the bat, I want to say, are people thinking these are leftover dinosaurs? Is that what they're
Yeah,
thinking?
I mean, there's different camps on it, and that's kind of that's kind of the camp that I come down on. That something that should be extinct or we think is extinct, but there's for whatever reason a few holdovers have managed to survive into the present day. I mean, there's a lot of other I've heard some other theories. Some think that these things are, some kind of like giant salamander type thing, giant eel. Heard that, and then a lot of people think that it's not a flesh and blood creature at all that we're talking about, but something more in the like paranormal realm, or like an apparition or whatever, for the lack of a better
Wow,
term.
wow. When I lived on Lake Tahoe for a while, and that is extremely deep. I think it's 1,400 feet deep. And I just remember, a lot of times I'd go swimming. It's a very cold lake, by the way. But a
Yeah.
lot of times I'd go swimming, and, I always get this feeling like, this so far below you, and anything could be there. I don't know if anyone's ever
Yeah.
seen anything on Lake Tahoe, but I know that a lot of major bodies of water in the world, people have seen things, and then you go back into historical times, and they were talking about mermaids and sea serpents, as they're crossing the ocean hundreds and hundreds of years ago. As far as
Yeah.
lake monsters reported historically, do you know how early ones have been reported?
Well, I mean, if you go back, like in say Lake Champlain, for instance, up in Vermont, there's documented reports there from, I believe, from the 1600s, and like Okanagan Lake, where the Ogopogo lives up in British Columbia. You know, as soon as European explorers or settlers or moved in there. Yeah, they started seeing things, and there were, the native people there had a lot of legends, and then a lot of these places, yeah, like in British Columbia, and again back in uh, the Lake Champlain area, Quebec, New York, Vermont. There's petroglyphs and things, of like, it looks like a giant lake monster. These tales, they go way back. The documented reports, I mean, a lot of those, they come with the early settlers in areas.
Right, right. Um, and Lake Champlain, do they call that Champy, right? Is that what they call?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Champy, yeah.
Has anyone ever taken a picture of that one in particular that you're aware of?
Yeah, there's actually lots of pictures. There's lots of videos. There's lots of pictures. Of course, it's hard to a lot of times trust what you're looking at. But there's a very famous photograph, the Mancy photograph, Sandra Mancy. I believe it was 1977. She took a picture that a lot of people try to debunk it and say it's a like a stump or something like that. But to me, it looks kind of like the neck of a dinosaur-like creature, and the photo's been analyzed. So it may not be a lake monster, but it's not it's not a fake. It's authentic. It's been analyzed, and there's quite a few photographs like that out there. Different locations too. Up in Okanagan Lake, there's been a lot of photos there. So yeah, there are pictures. A lot of the modern day pictures. I kind of like the older ones myself, because nowadays with anybody can Photoshop pretty easily these
Yes.
days. But yeah, there have been quite a few pictures, but no smoking gun
Yeah.
really.
That's always the problem with about anything in this in this realm. There's no smoking gun.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
as of
exactly.
yet. I got lost on Lake Champlain. I had an antique boat that took there with a girlfriend at the time, and we went way out on some island. We went swimming, and the day got longer and longer. And I thought, wow, that'd be really fun to putt around at night. So I started putting around at night, and it took me until I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning by the time I found my way back. That is a huge lake, and I did get into coves that there were a lot of like stumps sticking up and things like that. So was that
Yeah.
in particular, was that, as far as you know, one that was flooded, or has that always just been a large lake, like a glacial lake?
I think it's a glacial lake, but I think if I'm remembering right, that whole area there was underwater at some point in the past. So it is a glacial lake, but that I believe that entire area was like a shallow sea at some
I
point.
see.
And that's true of a lot of these lakes, that have these sightings. They were either, glacial lakes or else, part of, like an inland sea. A lot of these lakes.
Now, there was one lake monster that was seen that I was listening to briefly. That was actually, they flooded like a town for a reservoir, and so they've seen one since this dam was built and it was flooded. Not to say that there wasn't some type of lake there before, but I just thought that one was kind of, in particular, was kind of a tough one to swallow if it wasn't, a lake there for a long time, because you would think.
Yeah, yeah. That's true. Like Lake Norman, North Carolina, there's supposed to be there's a lot of sightings of like a lake monster down there. Harrington Lake in Kentucky, same thing there. There's a lake down in Argentina that again, a man-made lake, and people report seeing things in there. So yeah, I'm kind of with you. It's hard to it's hard to believe, but at the same time, there are some anomalies even in these man-made lakes.
What do you think? I know they've done a lot of searching and research on at Loch Ness. So in Scotland, have they ever picked up anything on radar that, as far as you know, that was unexplainable or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of a lot of
That's what
sonar
I meant. Sonar.
imagery
I'm
and
sorry.
that
Yeah.
sort of thing. That's been like things that are 30 feet and definitely not a fish. There have been a lot of those. I don't know about a lot, but I have heard several instances of that, and Loch Ness and a lot of other lakes, too. Um, I've had one person contact me shortly after I wrote my first book, and he was talking about he was out on Lake Champlain, and they picked up like a sonar image of something, 25 feet long, that thereabouts. So yeah, that does happen. Again, though, there's never really been any kind of smoke and gun, but yeah, those things do occur quite a bit.
What in other parts of, let's say, paranormal or even UFOs or things like that, we always rely on witness testimony. So I guess I would want to ask you this question: what would you consider as the best witness testimony that you're aware of?
Well, there's been a number of these reports, by I really like when you get an eyewitness account, like, say, and not to put one profession above another or anything like that, but like when you get reports like from police
Yeah.
officers. And the reason I like to get read about their testimonies is because they're trained to observe things that happen quickly. In their line of work, they have to, they've got to be on the witness stand and recount in court, things that they've witnessed. And so they are trained observers of things that happen, split second, boom, boom. So when you get reports from like police officers, things like that, that really kind of hits home with me. And then on top of that, you know, for them to come forward, when they do come forward, with their name and that sort of thing, that's kind of, they're really kind of sticking their neck out there with their credibility and stuff. So that really, maybe it wasn't a lake monster they saw, but they definitely saw something that, was
Now,
strange.
do any of these things cross over to ocean sightings? Similar sightings that people see in ocean in contemporary times?
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of the lake monster the descriptions of lake monsters are often quite similar, if not at times identical to some of the things that are reported in the oceans as well. So then that leads a lot of speculation. A lot of these lakes are rumored to have these underground passages that lead out to the sea. That's a rumor with Loch Ness, Lake Champlain, Okanagan Lake, and others. So that's always something I kind of keep in the back of my mind if there was some sort of passage to get to the sea, that maybe that's why you don't see these things regularly, and they've got that travel route. But yeah, and a lot of times the sea serpents, a lot of times the reports of those are sometimes a lot bigger than the lake monsters. Sometimes people report them being over 100 feet, but a lot of times they're pretty close to the lake monster
Now,
descriptions.
there's mysteries with the giant squid that could be just
Yeah,
absolutely huge.
yeah,
So yeah, and there's just the sea, for instance, the ocean is just so unexplored. I mean, I think
yeah.
I've heard it said that we know more about the moon's surface than we do about the ocean floor.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so deep and in places, and there's just there's not a lot of way to know what's really down there, and a lot of the species they find in the real depths, it looks like
Oh yeah,
alien life almost. It doesn't even look
right,
real.
right. Now, does is there any type of correlation to the depth of a lake as far as as far as people seeing lake monsters there?
Well, I think that there is, and that's not to say that things aren't seen in shallow lakes, because you do get sightings in shallow lakes, just like we were talking a moment ago, man-made lakes and things. But the bulk of your sightings are in these glacial lakes, and they are normally very deep. I think Loch Ness is 750 feet deep thereabouts. Lake Champlain, I think, like 450. I don't remember how deep Okanagan Lake gets, but I know it's well over 200 feet deep. So yeah, these really deep lakes, and Lake Tahoe, like you were saying, uh, 14, 15, however deep it is. I know it's really deep, but yeah, there's sightings there as well. And so these deep glacial lakes, for whatever reason, there's a correlation there for sure.
So actually, I didn't know that there were actually sightings on Lake Tahoe. There actually have been.
Yeah, yeah, they're not as common, or there's not as many as say Lake Champlain, but yeah, there's definitely quite a few reports from there, and I actually included a little section on Lake Tahoe in my first book. People are seeing something, and yeah, there's been a number of sightings, a couple by divers. There's been strange. Just a lot of strange reports of these lake monsters there. It's really the phenomenon is really widespread. I mean, if most of these big lakes like that, there's usually at least been a few reports.
I was talking to divers years ago from a university that were exploring the bottom of a lake in Maine called Great East Lake, Now it's only 200 some odd feet deep. It's not a real deep lake. But when I was talking to this guy, he was saying there was these little caverns like at the bottom, and he went in with a light in one and saw what he considered was about an 80-pound, he called it a togue. He said it's like a large lake trout that just, grows and grows. And so, it's just amazing. You think of these caverns and these animals that just, live on and on, not animals, for fish or whatever.
Yeah.
Who knows, the limit to the size they can get. And they're
Yeah.
usually pretty smart if they live that long.
Yeah, and they know how to keep hidden, and like you're saying, a lot of these lakes like Lake Tahoe, there are a lot of caverns and lava tubes, that sort of thing, and one of the reports that I put in my book was of a diver, and he was looking into one of those caverns, and like a large eel-like creature like him bursting out of it as
Jeez.
so those things, those kind of reports, they're definitely there, and so yeah, who knows what could be down there is the way I look at it. And and one thing, people kind of try to poke holes in the lake monster things, saying, well, you need colonies and breeding populations, and you do, but these things could live a really long time. Is one thing that I kind of point to, like the Greenland sharks that they came out earlier in the year, saying that they can live, over 430 years. So, maybe these lake monsters, if they have incredibly long lifespans, you don't need as many of them, to keep a small population going. So that's kind of something that I've always thought.
Yeah. Yeah, how about that? And I know that lifespans have a lot to do with evolution, the changes in evolution. So, these could be from somewhere way back and just, slowly evolving, in
Yeah,
small colonies. Someone in
sure.
the chat room wanted to know if you had any reports about the monster in the man-made Lake Thunderbird in Oklahoma. Have you ever heard of anything there?
Yeah, I actually, in my book, I included a chapter on the Oklahoma octopus, and that's one of those creatures that, or supposed creature that inhabits, I think three man-made lakes in Oklahoma, Lake Thunderbird, and there were a couple others. I can't really remember their names off the top of my head, but at any rate, there were these reports going around back in around 2007, 2008, for lack of a better word, like a freshwater octopus that was like grabbing people and drowning them and that sort of thing. So I put a little chapter on that in my book. I think that is more. I don't believe in the Oklahoma octopus. I think that I think if you really, when you really get down to it, there was a show on Animal Planet called The Lost Tapes, and they did an episode on it, and pretty much everything that you read about with the Oklahoma octopus can kind of be traced back to that episode. It's almost like someone got some information off that show and just started posting it, and it just kind of went from there. But it is kind of a cool story, some of the folklore behind it, and there was for real an uptick of drownings. I think around 2007, 2008 time frame. So there was something that was going on in the water, but I don't think it was an octopus.
Yeah, I want to talk to you in a little bit about the different types of things people are claiming they see. But while we're on this subject of the people drowning, are there reports of like these things attacking people besides that from in other lakes?
Well, I have heard of, boats, boats being attacked. And, you don't really hear a whole lot of, people being attacked, but, there are some instances, where people have been bitten and, maybe, I think a lot of times maybe that's, something maybe like a muskie or, or a pike or, some kind of fish like that, maybe. But, there are a few instances I've heard. You know, some of the sea serpent stories, of course. You get, especially the older ones. You hear, like again, boats being attacked or people in the water being attacked. But for the most part, it's usually just somebody sees like an undulating, body in the water and that sort of thing.
Uh-huh. Now, you were saying that there are some boats. So I'm picturing that these are boats like still in the water, maybe anchored or something like that, or not boats like traveling across the water. Would there be?
Yeah, usually you hear like well, like small boats that people are fishing in, that sort of thing. You know, I read about a newspaper article from about 140 years ago where two fishermen were out on a lake in New York, Cayuga Lake, I guess it is, and anyway, they had some fish in some baskets behind the boat, and I guess the lake monster or whatever grabbed a hold of those and pulled it taut, and eventually the creature like took a lunge at the boat and that sort of thing. And usually it's more the smaller like fishing boats that I've heard the things like that.
Ah, wow. Okay, sorry, I have to adjust. Something happened to our screen here. Hang on just a second.
Yeah.
Not sure how that happened. Okay. Um, Nothing's changing. Okay, here we go. Okay, it's back to normal. Okay. Um, so, uh, in your research, have you come across any cases where there was like in UFOs they call like massive sightings? Many witnesses all at once
Yeah.
seeing something. To me, that would add a heck of a lot of credibility to something. Are there mass sightings?
Yeah, sure. There's lots of them. One that I can think of. I don't remember what year. I want to say 2005. I could be off, but in Lake Tahoe, I think about maybe like five people saw something at the same time. I think like a jogger and several other people that were outside. They saw something up in Okanagan Lake, the Ogopogo. There's several instances where where that's been cited by a lot of different people. One was a lot of people on a beach. I'm trying to think. I think it was like over 17, 20 people. I can't remember now how many exactly, but that was something, and it was reported in the newspapers up there. I want to say that was around 1920s, 1930s. But there are instances like that, and like on in the Great Lakes and on Lake Champlain. Back when people used to. There were, the steamship passenger boats. There were, a lot of sightings like that occurred. So yeah, there have been a lot of these mass
What
sightings.
would you consider the most active of all? It sounds like Champlain. Is that it, or is there other lakes that are more active?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say, but as from what I can tell, that certainly seems to be the place with with the most documented reports. I want to say that there's over 600. I could be off, give or take 100, but there definitely are a lot of documented reports there. and there's a lot of people that are up there looking too.
Yeah. I know that's a college town. My nephew went there, and there's there's a lot of activity on the lake around there, and it's
Yeah.
beautiful, and it borders the state of New York. Uh, how many miles? Do you happen to know how big Lake Champlain is?
Ah, man, I had it in I want to. I could be off. So if I'm wrong, please don't
Yeah,
kill me,
just
somebody.
putting you
But
on the spot. That's all. Yeah.
I want to say it's like 180 miles long. Now I might, like I said, I might be off, but I know it's not that wide, but it's very long, and it's very long and narrow. I mean, I know that a little piece of it goes all the way up into Quebec, so I know it's pretty long.
And that is another glacial lake. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you look on a map, there's just like in the northeast, really in the northern United States and Canada, there's just like all these little, it just looks, like you know, you can just see where all these glaciers, were moving and just cut into the earth, and it's just backfilled, and for whatever reason, many of these lakes have these sightings today.
Now, are they seeing the so-called monsters like Champy? Are they seeing him or her in the same area, or is it all over the lake?
Well, I think that there's certain areas that people have more of the sightings, but yeah, I think that pretty much anywhere on the lake, there have been reports.
Okay, how about nighttime sightings?
Yeah, I have heard of nighttime sightings. I don't really have a whole lot of those in my book, but I know that nowadays people are, setting up the game cameras and that sort of thing that can get nighttime pictures, and yeah, so yeah, this is definitely something that happens.
Now, I also heard that one of the lakes. You probably even mentioned the lake as we're talking about this, but I'm not sure which lake it was. But they found like a large set of jaws and part of a skeleton or part of a backbone or spine or something. Are you aware of that? And was that a hoax, as far as you know?
I've heard of that. I can't remember what lake it's on, and I don't. I'm sorry, I don't really have any information on
Yeah.
that.
Okay. And since I'm on the topic of hoaxes, is there a lot of you're talking about today? There's digital images and Photoshop and all that. Are there a lot of what you see today is hoaxes and people playing with photos?
Yeah, I definitely, that's kind of why I was saying that I really like a lot of the old black and white photos from the '60s, or the old, a lot of the old 8 millimeter, the old home movies. I kind of like a lot better than some of the stuff you see today, because there is a lot of CGI, stuff out there. I think that kind of spills over more into the UFO sightings, but definitely there's been a lot of Photoshop and fakes, with the lake monster
Right.
things as
Now, what
well.
about the Great Lakes? What's going on in the Great Lakes?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of sightings in the Great Lakes. There's probably the most famous. There's South Bay Bessie, and there's been some up in Lake Michigan and some of that area. But the Bessie sightings, they in the, around Ohio, they go back to I want to say the 1700s, and there's I think I put one of the reports in my book where somebody shot at it. I don't remember if it was with a musket, or an old musket, or whatever. But yeah, so those go back, and especially back when there was a lot more. passenger boat traffic and that sort of thing. There are definitely a lot of reports.
Someone in the chat room wanted to know about are there any river monsters like in deep rivers?
Yeah, sure, you do get those. It seems more common with the lake monsters, but I included one in my book, the White River Monster in Arkansas and Missouri, and that's not really your stereotypical sea serpent type. That seems to be more of a almost like an out of place seal or something like that. But and it kind of appeared in the 30s, went away, and appeared again in the 70s, and so reports of that there were a few outbreaks, and then kind of real sporadic from there. But so you've had that, and a lot of your river monsters. A lot of times they're more like giant fish or turtles. You don't really get as much of the typical lake monsters in the rivers. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's not as
Okay.
common.
There's a couple people in the chat room noticed, and I have noticed too. There's like a clicking noise. I'm not sure if it's anything to do with your computer or not, but we keep hearing a clicking noise in the audio here. So just beware of that. And maybe a lot of times people, when they're talking, they move their hands, and I don't know if that's something you're doing, but I just thought I'd ask you if there's anything you're doing that might be making that noise. Now, what about the, is it Ogopogo? How do you say that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Ogopogo.
Can you describe what people are seeing and where that is?
Yeah, it's in Okanagan Lake in British Columbia, and it's a 30, 40 feet long, kind of serpentine in appearance, dark in color, kind of moves with vertical undulations. Some people have reported, seeing like big, like grapefruit sized eyes with it. And that's kind of typical of a lot of your lake monsters. They seem to have a similar description.
Uh-huh. Now, have you ever heard it? Someone just put this in the. Oh, okay. He's joking. Never mind. Okay. Now, what about Native American tales? As far as like any Native American stories on lake monsters or whatever?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. We were talking about the White River monster just now, and there's a tale of a brave's canoe being flipped over by that creature, and the Ogopogo. Supposedly, the Native Americans, the Ogopogo supposedly lives in around Rattlesnake Island on the lake near a place called Squally Point. And so before the Native Americans would cross in their canoes, they would take a sacrifice to, throw like a chicken or a dog or something to throw overboard to appease the creature, to give them safe passage. And you've got the tales where like a white person would come along and kind of make fun of it and not honor with the sacrifice and his canoe being flipped over and not being seen again, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of those old tales. It's hard to they're hard to document. It's hard to know if they're true or false, but there's some pretty cool stories like that.
When someone sees, now, I'm talking maybe in the United States, not worldwide, but if someone sees something in a lake, what do? I mean, how do they report it? Do they report it to a newspaper, police department? What is a typical reporting of something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a variety of ways. I mean, luckily now, we've got the internet, so you can go on and like Lake Norman or down in North Carolina, there's a site just for you to put your sighting in, and so nowadays it's a little bit easier. But yeah, like in Lake Erie, back in the '90s, there's been reports where people would report their sighting to a park ranger. Yeah, I guess some people have probably reported them, to the police as well, that sort of thing. So, yeah, that variety. There's no, one size fits all answer for that. A lot of these lakes do have, dedicated researchers that log the sightings, but not all of them do.
Yeah, that's and I imagine just the way it is with UFO sightings that a lot of people decide they're not going to say anything. So, what we're getting
Yeah.
for reports is a lot of people that just don't talk about it. Now, have you ever um, have you ever interviewed a witness that came forward because they saw your book or something like that, but yet not reported it previously?
Yeah, I mean, several people. After my book come out, I mean, you'd be surprised how many people just, inbox me on Twitter and tell me about their. I've got many from Lake Champlain, and and yeah, they didn't really want to give their real name or I mean, I had some of their names, but they would just tell me, like, hey, I what you're talking about, it's real because I saw it myself, or that sort of thing. And yes, I've had that quite a bit after my book came out. People hitting me up from all over the country, reporting things that they'd said. A lot of it's, I saw this 20 years ago, or this or that. But yeah.
Are most people seeing these things from the shoreline, or people in boats?
Well, you get both, and a lot of these even, people driving in their cars along the lakes and stuff. That's where, there's been a lot of upticks in sightings as new roads have been built along lakes. That people would be able to see them when they're driving by where they weren't able to before. So it's boats, it's cars, from the bank, and even up in Alaska, a lot of the bush planes have seen things in the water from bush planes.
Oh, really? Wow, I never even thought of that. So
Yeah,
if you see something from a plane, you get a whole different perspective of it. You can see it
yeah,
down in through the water, whatever the size of it is, and all that.
yeah,
Because I've seen like whales and stuff from planes before. When I used to fly a small plane, it's a whole different thing you're seeing. So in that case, are they
yeah.
reporting something really really large?
Yeah, the ones in Alaska, Iliamna Lake up there, bush pilots, especially back in the '60s, this was really a lot going on back then. They still have reports and all, but back then there was a whole lot of them, and these bush pilots were seeing these, and they were really more described as more fish-like than maybe your typical. I say typical lake monster, but they were supposedly 20, 30 feet long, and so just these enormous fish or whatever that they were spotting from the
Wow.
air.
Now, how many, or I shouldn't say how many, but would you guess to how many major places there are in the world where there's sightings? I mean, is it just too many to?
I Yeah, I think it's just too many. In my book, my first book, I did. I probably included, give or take, 60 lakes, and I really just kind of cut it off because I could have put another 300 pages, but I kind of wanted to keep it to lakes that had a fair amount of sightings. But yeah, it's too yeah, too many, too many to really count for sure.
Now, when someone sees one of these things and say, let's just say Lake Champlain, are they like terrified, or are they curious, or like they'll never go back there again, or what are some of the things you hear?
I mean, it varies. I guess it depends on the person's experience. But for the most part, from what I've seen, it's really just curiosity, and a lot of times, they're only seeing it for, they're not really observing it for a long period of time. Usually, it's a brief encounter, and it's just kind of a fascination.
Right. And what would you say is you said brief encounter, what would you say is like the longest people have actually witnessed something?
Well, I've heard of people observing these things for up to 20 minutes. I think in my book I talked about a case, Cressy up in Canada, where a lady who lived in a house on the lake observed something for a period of about 20 minutes, and also a crab boat captain down in Georgia, the Altamaha, that creature, he observed something similar to that for a period of about 20 minutes. Now, I don't think he really saw it the whole time, but kind of saw it on the water, and it would go under and come back up and that sort of thing. So I have heard of periods of up to 20 minutes, but normally, like I said, encounters seem to be pretty brief.
Now, what are the different types of things? You talked about serpents, you talked about the octopus one. What are the different types of things that people are seeing?
Well, you also hear of like giant. From time to time, you'll hear of like a giant turtle, uh, seals. As strange as that sounds, sometimes like an out of place seal, will be reported, and and uh, and a lot of times, just like massive fish sometimes can be mistaken too. Like alligator gar, or sometimes like an out of place alligator or crocodile, that sort of thing can also trigger these reports.
Someone in the chat room, we sort of talked about this earlier, but someone in the chat room wanted to know if there are any cases of missing people linked to these creatures.
That's a good question. I don't really know of know of any linkage there. That, certainly a lot of people do go missing in wilderness areas, so yeah, I imagine that's possible, but I don't really know of know of any link like
They could
that.
have been the witnesses and then they're gone. So,
Who
right.
knows? Strange things happen out in the wilderness, that's for
Has
sure.
any, say, you talked about police officers, they make, great witnesses, as I agree. Has anyone in particular that you're aware of that has any type of status, say political status or celebrity status or anything like that, have reported seeing something?
Now, as far as lake monsters, I'm trying to think if there's anybody. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head. That doesn't mean, of course, that it hasn't occurred. I know that and a lot of politicians have kind of gotten behind promoting legislation to protect these things. I know over in Maryland, one of the state senators there, back in the 70s and 80s, he was getting so many letters from constituents about Chessie, the Chesapeake Bay monster, that was there were a lot of sightings back in the early 80s, late 70s, and he was getting so much inquiry from his constituents that he put forth some legislation to promote the study of the creature. So yeah, so at times these creatures do get to kind of some high profile, like the White River Monster. There's actually a refuge for it that was some legislation was passed, and some of these other lakes have done similar things.
Uh-huh. Well, that's interesting. And I'm going to talk a little bit
Yeah.
more about something related to that, but I want to get to this chat room question, and that is, has there
Okay.
ever been any link to other paranormal, happenings or UFOs or anything like that? Sort of a link together or in the same area of sightings?
Well, a lot of these lakes, they are around areas of strange activity. I know Loch Ness. I've heard that there's been some strange sightings of other type of more paranormal things there. Um, Lake Chelan, in Washington State, there's a lot of Bigfoot reports around the lake, and I believe that area is known for UFO activity as well. So I don't know that there's a direct link or not, but a lot of people believe that these things are more from the paranormal. So that would make sense.
Now, has anyone taken? I know there has been some funding for some research. I know in Loch Ness. I'm not sure about other lakes. Has there been anyone funding any type of research to see if they can actually find something like in Champlain?
Yeah, I don't know if there's I know that some of the like Discovery, some of these like media outlets have funded some research as far as like grants or anything from the government. I'm not aware of anything. That doesn't mean that that there hasn't been something, but I'm not really aware of any more like publicly funded things.
Do you think that anyone? Do you think that science, any type of science, would ever take a hard look at this, or is it just too evasive and too career crushing?
Well, you like to think that science would take it seriously, but yeah, I don't look for it to happen. It would be great if it did. I mean, new things are being discovered all the time. Like recently that giant sunfish in the ocean down in the around Australia, New Zealand area. That thing is they had known about it from indigenous people since the 1500s, or had heard the legends of it, but they finally got evidence of it, and just maybe about a month and a half ago, I was reading an article about it. And, this thing's 9 feet long, 4,000 pounds. So there's definitely some things out there being discovered, but the sea serpents, lake monsters, that kind of has a stigma attached to
Yeah,
it.
yeah. But there is, like I mentioned earlier, there's so much unexplored and so many places to hide for, um, you know,
Yeah.
uh, it doesn't matter if we're scuba diving, whatever, in the depths of some of these places, something could hide so easily. Even if it was 100 feet long or 200 feet long, it still could hide. Um,
Yeah, I think so
the only
too.
thing is the sonar. That would be something that you would think there would be more hits off the sonar for something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you do get reports of that, but then you also hear of like these lakes being scanned that have sightings, and not nothing coming up. So it's one of those things. It's hard to find any smoking gun or anything definitive
And there could be
sometimes.
caverns below. There could be many reasons. And
Yeah, I think
yeah.
so.
So let's switch gears. We'll end out the show. I want to talk about your latest book, The Wild and Wonderful and Paranormal West Virginia. Can you talk a little bit about that? You say you say that it's a hotbed of paranormal activity.
Yeah, it sure is. West Virginia has in my opinion anyway, it has a disproportionate amount of paranormal activity and cryptid sightings. There's a lot of Bigfoot sightings, a lot of your large black cat sightings, all sorts of strange things. There's uh, any number of haunted locations there, and it just really is one of those places that kind of makes your hair stand up when you're when you're driving through a lot of areas there.
And and so what would I see you got chupacabra and what is devil monkeys? I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, devil monkeys. There's these reports, and uh, over here in Virginia, where I live, there's been a lot of reports in the southwestern portion of the state, but they kind of spill over into West Virginia. And to me, it sounds just like just like a lemur or just like a monkey, but they're very aggressive. There's been reports where these things will there were like two nurses were either driving to or from work, and they had a convertible, and like one of these things like jumped up on top of it and like like scratched the like scratched the fabric. And there's like another report, and this wasn't in West Virginia, this was in Virginia, but real close to the border, where like one of these things like somebody was like driving with their arm out the window, and one of these things like was on the side of the road and like jumped on his car and like scratched at his arm, and just all kinds of things like this. And then over in West Virginia around the Charleston area, like in the 40s, when they were doing some work on the railroads there were just these reports of just as like a monkey swinging through the trees. And but it was like real aggressive, and would come up to the car where the people were staying at night, and like scratching on the window and stuff like that. So they kind of got the name devil monkeys.
How about that? Now, you're saying that there's burial mounds, early burial mounds containing skeletal remains of giants. Is
Yeah.
that? I mean, as far as I know, there's no actual like science has not come out and said that there are actually giants. And you see a lot of things online about skeletal remains of these huge giants, but a lot of people saying that's just hoaxes. So what do you know about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hard to separate the wheat from the chaff with some of these giant reports. But if you look in the Kanawha Valley, the Ohio Valley, in West Virginia, there's a lot of these burial mounds that were excavated in the 1800s. And if you go through a lot of the Bureau of Ethnology's reports, which is the Smithsonian's reports back then, they don't really come right out and say, "Oh, we discovered giants," but there's a lot of reports of, and this is the Smithsonian's own writings, where skeletons 7.5 feet tall, have been found in these mounds, and so you could say that, well, that's just a really tall person, and okay, fine, but the thing about it is I don't have exact numbers in front of me, but if you find, say 150 skeletons and say 10 of them are 7.5 feet tall, that's a disproportionate amount.
Absolutely.
So there was something going on there, and these large skeletons were always, real elaborate burials. They would, a lot of them would be laid out, facing an east-west direction, and sometimes a spiral pattern of other skeletons around them, and they would be buried with, all sorts of artifacts and
Really?
things. So something really strange, was, and we really don't know a whole lot about the mound builders.
how about any dated material as far as
Yeah,
carbon dating?
yeah, yeah. I think that it depends on the mounds, but a lot of them, 200 BC to you know 800 AD, that time frame. I mean, depending on if it was Adena or Hopewellian, I think they could go back a little bit further. Some of the Adena
Yeah,
mounds.
yeah. All right, and you have a website, correct?
Yeah, denvermichaels.net.
And your books, why don't you go ahead and throw out the titles, and you can get them on Amazon. Can you also get them through your website as well?
Not Amazon, or if you for paperbacks, you can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or wherever you like to get books. If you're into the ebooks, Amazon. And just for everybody out there, my book, People Are Seeing Something, tonight and tomorrow, you can download a free Kindle edition of that book.
Oh,
So yeah, check it out.
excellent. All right. Okay, Denver. Thank you so much, and I hope your book writing continues and is successful. And I bet it's a lot of fun
Well,
too.
yeah, thanks, and I appreciate you
Sure
having me
thing.
on.
All right. Take care. Good
All right,
night.
good night.
All right. That's it for our show. Thanks so much. We are trying to put together a show coming up on net neutrality and rolling back the regulations, both sides of that. So I'm waiting to hear back from that, but unless that comes through before September 18th, that's when our next show will be. So in other words, if that show doesn't happen, our next show will be September 18th, and that's going to be about the Dyatlov Pass. We have a great European guest that's going to be talking about that. Should be really, really interesting. So thanks so much for joining us. And remember, we'll be back possibly before September 18th, but that will be, as it stands right now, that will be our next show. All right, everyone. We'll see you next time.